The boy wept before the castle every day, and begged the prince for help to save his ailing mother. April draped the hills of Altenburg in a shroud of damp grey. The sky hung low over the spires and ramparts of Castle Drachenhof, its stones cold as iron beneath a curtain of fine mist. In the hush of dawn, before the great square below the castle gates stirred with market wagons and townsfolk, a small boy knelt alone upon the cobblestones. Felix Hartmann clasped his thin hands before him, knuckles whitened with cold. His patched woolen coat sagged about his shoulders, his scarf, a fraying length of knitted grey, trailing down his chest. Beneath the curls matted against his brow, his pale face remained fixed upon the great gates. The iron bars soared high above him, adorned with the rampant griffin of House Altenburg. They had not opened for him, not yesterday, nor the day before. "Please," he whispered, voice hoarse from the repetition. "Please, Your Highness, help my mother." The plea echoed faintly in the courtyard beyond, swallowed by stone and fog. Felix had come every day since the eviction. Before the sun rose, he slipped from the draughty attic where his mother lay shivering beneath a threadbare quilt. He crossed the sleeping town with bare hands tucked beneath his arms, the streets slick with early frost. And here, before the gates of Drachenhof, he knelt. He did not know if anyone heard, but he knew that princes ruled from behind those gates. Princes could give orders that mattered. Princes could save his mother. Inside the high windows of the castle's east wing, Prince Victor von Altenburg stood in the shadow of a frost-rimmed casement. His gaze lingered upon the solitary figure below, as it had for several mornings now. Felix did not look upward. He had not seen Victor watching. Yet the prince's attention had fixed upon him with increasing weight. Not out of idle curiosity, Victor had learned long ago to filter the ceaseless tides of petitioners and grievances that sought his ear, but because of the boy's endurance. Each morning, through mist and cold, the child returned. He asked not for bread, nor coin, but for mercy, for a mother's life. Victor folded his arms, the chilled glass brushing the sleeve of his coat. He had risen early to review the morning's dispatches, but found himself once more drawn to this window. A discomfort had grown within him, a small, sharp stone caught beneath the polished surface of duty. He summoned Herr Siedler, the steward assigned to household affairs, a measured man, practiced in discretion. "Who is that child?" Victor asked without preamble. Siedler's gaze flicked out the window, brows lifting. "The boy has been here since the eviction of his mother." "The seamstress, Lena Hartmann." "Seamstress." Victor's tone sharpened. He recalled the name faintly, a talented needlewoman once employed by his late mother, Princess Eleanor. Siedler continued, voice flat. "She was ordered from her dwelling by Baron König's office. Official cause, delinquent rent." A frown deepened between Victor's brows. "And the true cause?" The steward hesitated. "There are rumors. It is said the Baron's attentions were unwelcome, and that Mistress Hartmann made the mistake of speaking of it openly." Victor turned from the window, the familiar stir of distaste rising in him. König had served his father's court loyally, yet Victor had long distrusted the Baron's hunger for power, his disdain for those beneath the nobility's gaze, and the boy's presence here. "How has it been permitted to continue?" Siedler offered a faint shrug. "The guards have been ordered not to interfere. No formal petition has been brought forward, and thus no action taken." Victor's mouth tightened. The boy had no patron to press his case, only a voice worn thin by pleading. In that absence, the court ignored him. "Enough," Victor said. "Send word to the castle physician. I want a full report on Lena Hartmann's condition, discreetly." Siedler inclined his head. "As you command, Highness." Victor remained at the window after the steward departed, eyes narrowing. It was not sentiment alone that moved him. A sovereign's mercy must be measured against duty, against the stability of the court. But neither could he stomach the thought of a woman left to die in some squalid attic under his rule, her child driven to beg beneath his gates, The following hours brought little ease. Through council meetings and correspondence, Victor's thoughts returned again and again to the silent plea in the boy's upturned face. By afternoon, a sealed note reached him from Dr. Weber. Mistress Hartman is gravely ill, prolonged exposure and fever, prognosis uncertain without proper care. Victor read the words twice, fingers tightening upon the page. Enough. Summoning Seidler once more, he gave a new order. Arrange for Mistress Hartman to be brought to the castle infirmary at once. Under my authority. Seidler hesitated. Highness, such an action will not go unnoticed. Victor's gaze met his with cool finality. Let it be noticed. That evening, beneath gathering dusk, a covered carriage drawn by two black geldings passed through the lower streets of Altenburg. Within, Lena Hartman lay swaddled against the cold, her breath shallow, her skin waxen. Felix sat beside her, clutching her limp hand in both of his small ones. He had not wished to leave the attic. His mother had refused at first, her pride fierce even in sickness. But when Felix whispered of the prince's command, of the chance to find help, her resistance faltered. Now she lay as though adrift, the motion of the carriage unnoticed. Only Felix's whispered reassurances filled the hollow space. Castle Drachenhof's gates opened for them at last. Servants moved quickly under Seidler's direction. Lena was carried with care to the infirmary, a bright, sterile chamber near the castle's inner courtyard. There, Dr. Weber set to work, aided by the resident nurse. Word spread swiftly through the court. A common woman, installed within the prince's walls under his own order. Tongues wagged behind silk fans and within shadowed alcoves. Baron Koenig, returning from a meeting with trade delegates, caught wind of the news with thin-lipped displeasure. In the infirmary, Lena stirred weakly against the linens. Her mind hovered between waking and fevered dreams. When her lashes fluttered open, a tall figure stood beside her bed. Prince Victor. He wore no crown, only a dark navy frock coat and the crimson sash of his house. His presence filled the small space with a restrained energy. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Your Highness, she whispered, voice rough. I did not seek this charity. You did not need to, Victor replied quietly. Your son sought justice. I would know the truth of what was done to you. Lena's gaze, though dimmed by illness, met his with wary dignity. Truth is of little value to those who already hold power. A faint smile touched Victor's mouth, one without amusement. Perhaps, but not to all. Their eyes held for a moment longer, unspoken currents running beneath the surface. Then Victor inclined his head. You will remain here under my protection, he said. Your son will be cared for. Rest now. Lena's lashes drifted shut, exhaustion pulling her under once more. Outside the infirmary, Victor stood motionless in the dim corridor. His jaw was set, his thoughts restless. Behind him, light footsteps approached. Highness. The voice belonged to a courtier, a thin man with eyes too quick. Baron Koenig has been informed of the seamstress's arrival. Victor's expression remained unreadable. Then let him be. As the courtier bowed and retreated, Victor's gaze lingered upon the closed infirmary door. A choice had been made, yet its weight had only begun to settle. That night, alone in his private chambers, Victor poured a measure of cognac, but left it untouched. The storm had been set in motion, and he had no illusions about the undercurrents that would soon rise within his court. Morning would bring its share of consequence, and he would meet it. At dawn, Victor rose. With practiced hands, he fastened the silver buttons of his frock coat, smoothed the crimson sash across his chest. His steps carried him toward the infirmary once more, toward the woman whose presence now stirred more than mere duty within him, toward a second visit that would not go unnoticed. The pale light of the next morning seeped through sheer curtains drawn across tall windows. In a small guest chamber tucked between the east wing and the castle gardens, Lena Hartman stirred beneath a quilted coverlet. The fever that had seized her for days now retreated. leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and a raw awareness of her surroundings. Her gaze drifted across the unfamiliar room. Whitewashed walls adorned with a faded tapestry, a small writing desk, and a wardrobe whose polished surface reflected the muted dawn. A porcelain wash basin sat atop a washstand beside the bed. The air carried the faint scents of lavender and beeswax, far removed from the musty chill of the attic she had left behind. With great effort, Lena shifted her gaze toward the corner where Felix lay curled upon a narrow cot. He had refused all offers to sleep elsewhere. His small form rose and fell in a steady rhythm, one hand clutching the worn edge of his blanket. Relief tangled with fresh guilt in her chest. She was in the prince's castle. The same man whose household had cast her out now offered her shelter. Her pride recoiled, even as her body remained too frail to object. She would not have accepted it for herself. But for Felix, for his chance at warmth, safety, she had swallowed her resistance. A soft knock sounded at the door. Before she could answer, it opened to admit Dr. Weber and a young maid bearing a tray of broth and fresh linens. "Good morning, Mistress Hartman," the physician greeted her in a tone of practiced calm. "You've improved markedly overnight. His Highness has ordered that you be moved from the infirmary to more suitable quarters." Lena's brows drew together. "I am grateful for your care, but I cannot remain here." Weber shook his head gently. "It is not a matter for debate. His Highness insists. You are to regain your strength. The prince will see you are afforded privacy and comfort." Privacy. Comfort. Words that might well have been foreign in the language of her recent life. Yet here they were, spoken within stone walls that had once seemed as distant as the stars. She said nothing more, lacking the strength to protest. Felix woke soon after, eyes wide with relief when he saw her sitting upright. "Mama!" he whispered fiercely, climbing into the bed to clasp her hand. "You're better." She brushed a trembling hand through his curls. "A little, darling. Thanks to you." His face shone with quiet pride. "The prince helped. He sent the doctor. He said you'd be safe here." Lena's throat tightened. What could she say to a child who had seen more of hardship than a boy should? Her heart ached beneath the gratitude that burned like shame. Later that morning, after a modest meal and further care from the nurse, Lena was moved to the guest chamber. The castle servants were efficient, if not particularly warm. Felix trailed after her, his small hand wrapped tightly around hers. As they passed through marbled corridors, whispers bloomed in their wake. The prince's seamstress, the one König tried to ruin, now in the East Wing, under the prince's protection. The words stung her ears. Her back straightened in reflex, though each step cost her strength she scarcely had. She would not bow her head before courtiers who knew nothing of her worth. In the days that followed, the castle seemed to pulse with curiosity and thinly veiled disdain. Certain noblewomen lingered longer than necessary near her chamber, their sharp eyes appraising every thread of her modest gown. Maids gossiped with careless tongues. The distance between Lena and the aristocracy remained an unbridgeable chasm, one she had no desire to cross, save for the danger it posed to Felix. Felix, unaware of the darker currents, flourished. The warmth of his new cot, the kindness of the physician's staff, and above all the presence of the prince himself kindled hope where despair had lived. For Victor visited often. At first, it was under the guise of ensuring her well-being. He arrived accompanied by Dr. Weber or a steward, standing at respectful distance to inquire after her health. But soon the pretense faded. His visits grew longer, his questions more personal. "You speak with more honesty than most within these walls," Victor remarked one afternoon, his gaze lingering upon her as she folded a blanket over Felix's cot. Lena straightened. "Perhaps because I have no standing to lose here, Highness." A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "You speak as though courage were simple." "It is simple," she replied quietly, "but not easy." He regarded her then, not as a prince appraising a subject, but as a man glimpsing something unexpected. In her presence, Victor felt a stirring of unfamiliar disquiet. She neither flattered nor sought his favor. There was clarity in her words, and beneath them, a wounded pride that called to something within him he had long buried. Their conversations deepened in the days that followed. They spoke of Felix's future, of the challenges she had faced as a widow in a city ruled by men such as König. Victor, in turn, revealed glimpses of his own solitude, a life shaped by the weight of expectation and the loss of a mother whose kindness had once softened the castle's cold halls. He found himself seeking her company beyond obligation. Her intelligence drew him. Her resilience humbled him. Yet it was her unguarded moments, a flicker of vulnerability, a fleeting glance, that captured him utterly. Lena, though wary, felt the shift between them as keenly as he. Each visit left her pulse unsteady, her breath shallow beneath the layers of propriety she tried to maintain. She saw in Victor not the untouchable figure of power, but a man bound by chains of duty, not so unlike her own burdens. Still, the danger of this growing intimacy pressed upon her. Whispers sharpened as Victor's presence became more frequent. During her rare ventures beyond her chamber, walks through the inner courtyard with Felix, brief visits to the castle library, she endured polite smiles, edged with disdain. One afternoon, as she passed beneath the arched gallery, two noblewomen approached. Their gowns shimmered with the latest Parisian fashions, their gazes cool as glass. "Such generosity from our prince," one remarked lightly. "He has always possessed a charitable heart." "Indeed," the other replied with a slow smile. "One can only hope such kindness does not inspire misplaced ambition." Lena met their gazes squarely, her voice calm. "I seek nothing beyond my son's safety." The words hung between them. The noblewomen moved on, their satisfaction evident in every measured step. Lena returned to her chamber with trembling hands, her resolve hardening. Whatever kindness Victor offered, she must not allow herself to hope for more. The court would never accept it, nor would König. She was unaware that Victor had witnessed the exchange from a distant alcove. The burn of anger that rose within him surprised even himself. That evening, restlessness drove him to the gardens after a council meeting. The moon hung low over the clipped hedges and gravel paths, its silver light softening the castle's austere angles. Near the central fountain, he caught sight of a slender figure seated alone upon a stone bench. Lena. She wore a simple cloak over her gown, her hair braided and pinned with care. Felix must have been asleep, for she sat alone, her gaze distant beneath the pale light. Victor approached, his steps soundless upon the path. Only when he stood near did she glance up, surprise flickering across her face. "Your Highness," she murmured, rising instinctively. He motioned her to remain seated. "Not tonight. Let us be simply Victor and Lena." A long silence passed between them, taut as a drawn bow. She spoke first, voice low. "I did not think you would be here." "Nor I," he admitted. "But the air within these walls grows thick with words unsaid." She looked away. "I know what they say. I am a threat to your standing here, even without seeking to be." Victor's chest tightened. "You are no threat. And no harm will come to you or your son while I draw breath." Emotion shimmered in her gaze before she could mask it. "It is not myself I fear for. It is Felix. If I fall further from favor, he will suffer the weight of it." He drew a breath to answer, but her words held him still. In that moment, beneath moonlight and bare branches, the distance between their worlds seemed fragile as spun glass. Victor reached for her hand, hesitated, then let it fall to his side. Their gazes met, charged with all that neither dared voice. Unseen by either, a shadow shifted beyond the hedge. Baron König watched from concealment, lips curling in a thin smile. He had seen enough to confirm his suspicions. The prince's attachment to the seamstress had deepened dangerously, but charm alone could not shield her from ruin. There were truths yet hidden in Lena Hartmann's past, and he would find them. Victor's visits to Lena became more frequent, though he no longer pretended they were necessary. If he returned to her chamber under the excuse of checking her health, it was only out of habit, an excuse to mask the deeper pull that led him there. Each time the day's duties released him from council, or his presence was no longer required in the state rooms, he found his steps drawn toward the East Wing. Their conversations slipped beyond the boundaries of polite inquiry. They spoke not of pleasantries, but of memories, regrets, and fleeting hopes. Victor learned that Lena's late husband, a journeyman printer, had died 4 years prior of a fever that swept the lower districts. That she had worked tirelessly to keep Felix clothed and fed with her needle and thread. That her talents had once earned the patronage of the late Princess Eleanor, until Baron Koenig's attentions turned sour and her small world unraveled. In turn, Victor shared pieces of himself with her, threads he rarely permitted anyone to touch. His own isolation since his father's death, the suffocating expectations laid upon his shoulders, the loneliness beneath the mantle of his title. With Lena, words flowed unbidden. There was no need to maintain the mask of a prince, only the voice of a man who longed to be heard. Their bond grew in the silences as much as the words. A shared glance across the room when Felix spoke with innocent cheer. The brush of Victor's hand against hers as he passed her a book from the shelf. The faint quickening of breath when their eyes met for a moment too long. Felix had taken to Victor without hesitation. The boy's trust bloomed each day, drawn by the prince's steady kindness and the warmth that others seemed to withhold. Victor, in turn, found himself protective of the child, more fiercely than he had anticipated. The boy's hand would slip naturally into his when they walked the gardens, a gesture that neither questioned. The change did not go unnoticed. Baron Koenig, ever watchful, observed the deepening connection with a practiced eye. His influence within the court remained considerable, and he used it now with precision. Quiet meetings in drawing rooms, whispers behind closed fans, suggestions planted in the ears of dowagers whose pride had long sought a return to stricter courtly order. Among those courtiers was Lady Isolde von Reichenbach. Isolde had once been regarded as an ideal match for Victor, elegant, wealthy, born of noble blood untainted by scandal. She had long harbored ambitions of securing her place beside the prince. Lena Hartmann's presence was an affront she would not bear. When Koenig suggested an opportunity to remind the court of propriety, Isolde did not hesitate. The gathering was arranged beneath a thin veil of civility, a small reception in the blue drawing room, ostensibly to honor recent acts of charity within the principality. An invitation was extended to Lena, couched as a gesture of gratitude for her recovery and resilience. She nearly declined, sensing the trap beneath the polite words. But it was Felix who convinced her, eyes bright with hope, that such an invitation might mean acceptance. For his sake, she agreed. On the appointed evening, Lena entered the chamber with measured steps, her hand resting lightly on Felix's shoulder. She wore a simple gown of deep green silk, one of the few gifted to her by the prince's household. Her dark hair was neatly pinned, her chin lifted with quiet resolve. The room glittered with nobility. Gowns of lavender and ice blue shimmered beneath the crystal chandeliers. Perfumed air coiled thickly around the guests, their voices low and calculated. Victor arrived shortly after, his gaze sweeping the room until it found her. He had not been informed of her invitation, and a dark line of concern drew across his brow. He moved toward her at once, but Isolde intercepted him with a silken smile. "Your Highness," she purred, "how gracious of you to join us. It warms the heart to see such generosity extended to all." Victor's jaw set, but he offered no reply, his eyes already searching for an opening. Lena stood near the far wall, aware of every glance that flicked toward her, every whispered breath. Felix clung to her side, his small face solemn. When the gathering moved to informal conversation, Isolde struck. "Oh, Mistress Hartmann," she called sweetly, drawing the room's attention. How fortunate we are to be graced by your presence. We were only just discussing the virtues of propriety and knowing one's place within society. A faint ripple of laughter passed through the circle. Lena met the noblewoman's gaze without flinching. And what place is that, my lady? Isolde's smile sharpened. Why, one suited to one's birth and station, of course. It is said the late Princess Eleanor had a fondness for uplifting those beneath her. How charitable. I do wonder what she would think of the present circumstances. The words hung in the air, a blade drawn beneath the mask of civility. Before Lena could respond, Victor's voice cut through the silence. Lady Isolde. Every head turned. Victor crossed the room with measured strides, his expression carved from stone. Without hesitation, he extended his arm to Lena. Come, Mistress Hartman, he said, voice low and steady. You have endured more than enough of such company. Lena's breath caught. Slowly she placed her hand upon his arm, the warmth of his touch searing through her glove. Gasps rose among the gathered nobles. Murmurs swelled. Scandal, impropriety, disgrace. Yet Victor gave no ground. He led Lena from the chamber with deliberate grace, Felix following close behind. Once beyond the reach of prying eyes, Victor guided her to a quiet corridor. He turned to face her, the weight of unspoken words thick between them. I should not have allowed this, he said, voice rough. They had no right. I chose to attend, Lena replied softly. I knew what it would be. He shook his head, anger flickering beneath his calm. You should not have had to endure it. Lena's gaze softened. You cannot shield me from what I am. His eyes darkened. You are not what they say. A tremor passed through her. In the hush of the corridor, with only the beat of her heart in her ears, Lena felt the wall between them splintering. Victor, she whispered, the name falling from her lips without thought. This cannot be. His breath caught. In one step, he closed the space between them, his hand rising, but hovering, not daring to touch. I cannot. I will not pretend anymore, he said thickly. I care for you, more than is wise, more than is permitted. Tears stung her eyes. And if you do, what future is there for us? None. I will not be the cause of your ruin, nor Felix's. He reached for her then, fingers brushing her cheek in a touch both tender and desperate. Do not ask me to turn away. Her throat tightened. Please, for both our sakes, you must. Victor's hand dropped, his chest rising with a ragged breath. He nodded once, a motion of surrender that cost him more than any battle. Without another word, Lena turned and fled to her chamber, Felix in tow. That night, Victor stood alone upon the castle's east balcony, eyes fixed upon the darkened windows of Lena's room. His heart burned with the truth he could no longer deny. At dawn, he rose from a restless sleep and made his way to the east wing. The chamber stood empty, the bed stripped, the wardrobe bare. Felix, pale and trembling, awaited him in the corridor. They made her leave, he whispered. They said if she stayed, they'd take me away. She had to go. A cold fury settled over Victor, more piercing than any blade. Baron Koenig's hand was upon this. Without hesitation, Victor turned on his heel, his voice hard as iron. Prepare my horse. I will find her. Victor strode through the east wing with clipped steps, the weight of rage pressing into every movement. The morning light had barely broken through the grey mist outside the castle walls, but already the corridors hummed with wary glances and muffled whispers. His heart pounded with a steady, dangerous rhythm as he searched for any trace of Lena. Her chamber had been stripped bare. No sign of where she had gone, no message left behind. Only Felix's pale, tear-streaked face and trembling voice had given him the first cruel truth. Someone had forced her to flee. Someone had threatened to take her child. Now Victor would know who. He turned sharply into the servants' wing, the air colder here, the stone walls pressing in. At the far end of the corridor, an older chambermaid named Greta emerged from a storeroom, clutching a folded cloth. Loyal to the late Princess Eleanor, Greta had never joined the ranks of gossips. When she saw Victor approaching, her eyes widened, and she dipped into a low curtsy. "Your Highness!" "Where is Lena Hartman?" he demanded, voice low, but edged with steel. Greta hesitated, wringing the cloth between her hands. I do not know where she went, sire. Only what I was told." "Speak." She swallowed hard. "Yesterday afternoon, the steward's man came with a message. Not from you, sire, but from Baron Koenig. He said Mistress Hartman had to leave before dawn. If she remained, they would take young Master Felix into state custody, on charges of neglect." Her voice broke with a slight shiver. She had no choice. I heard her weeping while she packed what little they had. Victor's jaw locked. "Who else knows of this?" "Only the nurse who attended her," Greta whispered. She was frightened to speak of it. "Thank you," Victor said grimly. "You have done right to tell me." He did not wait for further words. Turning on his heel, he strode toward the main council chamber, his pulse a thunder in his ears. By mid-morning, the chamber was already gathering. The weekly court session drew nobles and officials alike, an audience more varied than any private council. The tall arched windows cast pale shafts of light upon the polished floor, the scent of aged wood and incense lingering in the air. Victor entered alone, his crimson sash stark against the dark navy of his coat. Conversation stilled. Heads turned. Baron Koenig stood near the dais, speaking in low tones to a cluster of conservative nobles. When he caught sight of the prince's approach, his smile flickered, wary. Victor ascended the dais and faced the assembled court. His gaze swept over them all. Duke Reinhardt, Lady Isolde with her narrowed eyes, the frowning dowagers, the younger progressives clustered uncertainly to one side. He let no preamble soften his words. "I have come to address a grave abuse of power," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber with resonant force. "An act that strikes at the very principles of justice in this court." A stir rippled through the assembly. "Yesterday, Mistress Lena Hartman was forced to flee this castle under threat," Victor continued, his tone unflinching. "A threat that her child would be seized by the state upon false charges, if she did not comply." Murmurs rose. Faces turned toward one another, eyes widening. Victor's gaze locked upon Baron Koenig. "And this was done without my sanction, without legal cause, by those who believe themselves above both justice and conscience." Koenig stepped forward, mask of civility firmly in place. "Your Highness, surely there is some misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," Victor cut in sharply. "I have spoken with those who witnessed the message delivered. This was no rumor, but deliberate coercion." The chamber fell to a tense hush. Victor drew a breath, his voice deepening. "It is time this court ceased its games of cruelty and malice. Lena Hartman is under my protection. Her son is under my protection. Any further action taken against them will be regarded as an attack upon the crown itself." A gasp broke from one side of the chamber. The progressives straightened, eyes shining with sudden hope. The conservatives stiffened, whispers crackling among them. Lady Isolde's fan snapped shut with a sharp flick. Koenig's face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. Victor's next words rang out like a bell. "Let no one mistake my meaning. I hold Mistress Hartman in the highest personal regard, and I will not stand by while those within these walls conspire against her safety or dignity." The declaration sent fresh ripples through the gathering. Several of the elder nobles murmured in scandalized tones, but the younger faction exchanged glances of growing approval. From the gallery above, concealed by a carved screen, Lena stood frozen. At the urging of Victor's aunt, one of the few to offer her quiet support, she had come in secret to witness the session. Now her breath caught painfully in her chest. He had spoken not only to defend her, but with a depth of feeling that left no doubt of his true regard. Tears pricked her eyes, unbidden. Below, Victor's gaze swept the room once more. "Let those who value justice stand with me," he finished. "And let those who would corrupt this court be named for what they are." With that, he stepped back from the dais, spine straight, expression unyielding. The chamber remained suspended in uneasy silence. Above, Lena pressed trembling fingers to her lips. The world seemed to tilt beneath her. She could no longer deny what had grown between them, nor what he had risked to claim it before all. As the session drew to a restless close, she slipped away unseen. Later that afternoon, Victor paced the East Gardens, the weight of the morning's confrontation still pressing upon him. He had not known whether she had heard, nor whether she would come. But as the shadows lengthened, Lena appeared at the garden's edge. Their eyes met across the distance. Without a word, she approached him, her face pale but resolved. "You spoke for me," she whispered when they stood at last within reach. "Before them all. I spoke the truth," he replied softly. "And I will do so again." Her voice trembled. "You must know what they will say, what they will do." "I know," he said, "and I no longer care." Tears welled in her eyes. "You do not understand. If this continues, they will seek to destroy you, to destroy Felix." "I will not allow it," Victor said fiercely. His hand rose to cradle her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear. "Lena, I love you." A soft sob broke from her throat. "And I love you. But how can we fight them?" He held her gaze, his voice steady. "Together. Openly. No more shadows. No more fear." She closed her eyes for a moment, drawing a trembling breath. When she looked at him again, her resolve had hardened beneath the weight of love and sacrifice. "Yes," she whispered. "Together." He drew her into a fierce embrace, the truth of their bond sealed at last. They stood thus beneath the fading sky until the tolling of the castle bell summoned them to the great hall. Victor took her hand in his. "Come, we will face them now." And with Lena's fingers entwined in his, he led her toward the royal assembly where their stand would be made. The great assembly hall of Castle Drachenhof stood hushed beneath its vaulted ceiling. Light poured through tall arched windows, gilding the polished floors and the heavy banners of House Altenburg that hung in solemn grandeur. The nobility of the principality had gathered in full, every seat in the tiered galleries occupied, every corner of the chamber filled with rustling silks, whispered voices, and watchful eyes. At the center of it all stood Prince Victor. His crimson sash gleamed against his dark coat, the silver circlet of his house resting upon his brow. His expression was composed but implacable, a man who had weighed the consequences and chosen his path. On his left stood Lena, her slender figure clad in a simple but elegant gown of deep green silk. Her hair was pinned in a modest chignon, her chin lifted with quiet dignity. On Victor's right stood Felix, small but straight-backed, his hand held firmly in Victor's own. A ripple of unease ran through the assembly as the three approached the dais. The prince's presence alone commanded respect. That he appeared with the seamstress and her child at his side sent a shock through the ranks of Altenburg's old guard. Baron Koenig lingered near the council table, his gaze sharp beneath hooded lids. Beside him, Lady Isolde's fan moved in measured flicks, her mouth set in a line of ice. Victor ascended the dais, pausing before the assembled nobles. When he spoke, his voice resonated through the hall with calm authority. "My lords and ladies," he began, "I stand before you today, not as a sovereign bound by empty custom, but as a man determined to honor truth above convenience, justice above prejudice." The words rang clear. Silence held the room in its grip. For too long, certain voices in this court have sought to tear down a woman of courage and integrity, a woman whose only fault was to reject the corrupt attentions of power. He looked squarely at Koenig. Such actions end here. A few heads turned sharply, whispers rose in the galleries. Victor drew Lena forward with a gentle motion. She stood beside him, her hands folded calmly, her gaze meeting the nobles without flinching. "It is my will," Victor continued steadily, "and my deepest wish to take Lena Hartman as my wife. I will marry her, not in secret, not as an act of indulgence, but in rightful union." Gasps broke across the chamber. An elderly duke rose at once, voice trembling with outrage. "Your Highness, this defies centuries of order. A prince does not wed beneath his station." Lady Isolde rose beside him, her tone sharpened to a blade. "It invites disgrace upon the very throne. What precedent does this set?" Victor's gaze did not waver. "It sets the precedent that honor is not determined by birth, nor love by rank." A murmur of approval stirred among the younger nobles. The progressive faction had long waited for such defiance of the rigid order. Koenig stepped forward, a thin smile curving his mouth. His voice slid through the charged air. "Highness, if I may, before such binding declarations are made, the court should be made aware of certain truths." From the folds of his coat, Koenig produced a sealed document, holding it aloft. "In my duty to the principality, I have obtained evidence that Mistress Hartman has concealed matters from this court. Matters which should be known before any royal union proceeds." A collective breath caught. Victor's jaw tightened, but he inclined his head. "Present your so-called evidence." Koenig unfolded the parchment with deliberate slowness. "It concerns the late husband of Mistress Hartman, one Heinrich Hartmann. This document suggests that he was implicated in the publication of subversive pamphlets, treasonous to the crown." A rustle of unease swept through the room. Koenig's smile widened. "It seems, then, that Mistress Hartman carries not only scandal but a tainted legacy." He extended the document toward the council secretary. But Victor spoke before it could be taken. "That document," Victor said coolly, "is a forgery." Koenig's hand froze. Victor's voice deepened. "I had already conducted my own investigation into these matters. Heinrich Hartmann was cleared of all charges posthumously. The so-called treasonous pamphlets were falsely attributed to him by political rivals. This court may verify the records within the royal archives, records that I ordered unsealed." He turned his gaze upon Koenig. "You have brought deceit into this hall. You have attempted to blacken an innocent name to serve your own ends." A roar of murmurs surged through the nobles. "Such actions cannot stand," Victor continued. "Therefore, by my authority as prince, I hereby strip Baron Otto Koenig of his position as steward. He is to be removed from all offices of influence effective immediately." Stunned silence met his words. Koenig's face drained of color, his composure fracturing. He opened his mouth to protest, but Victor's gaze held him fast. "Guards," Victor commanded softly, "escort him from this chamber." 2 guards advanced, their movements swift and unyielding. Koenig, cornered by the weight of his own failure, could do nothing but comply. The doors closed behind him with a resonant thud. Victor turned back to the assembly. "You have heard my intent," he said, his voice calm but iron-strong. "I will marry Lena Hartman. I will raise her son as my own, and I will defend their place in this court with every measure of my strength." A few elders still bristled in rigid disapproval, but among the younger nobles, voices of assent began to rise. Slowly, reluctantly, the tide of opinion shifted. The prince had declared himself, and none could stand against the resolve he had shown. Later that day, beneath the soft light of the castle chapel, a quiet ceremony took place. No grand fanfare, no throngs of onlookers, only those few whom Victor trusted to witness this moment of truth. Lena stood before him in a gown of ivory and pale gold, her eyes luminous with both joy and disbelief. Felix, dressed in a small, formal suit, stood proudly at Victor's side. With solemn words and steady hands, Victor pledged himself to her. Lena's voice trembled only once as she spoke her vows. When the ring slid upon her finger, a soft gasp escaped her lips, a sound of wonder more than surprise. Felix beamed with a pride that seemed to outshine the very light of the stained glass windows. As the ceremony ended, Victor drew Lena close, pressing a gentle kiss to her brow. For a long moment, they stood wrapped in a silence that spoke more than any words could. Later, beneath a clear spring sky, the three of them walked through the castle gardens. The air was fragrant with blooming lilacs and the fresh scent of earth awakening from winter. Sunlight danced upon the paths, casting dappled shadows over the gravel and grass. Victor held Lena's hand as they strolled, Felix skipping ahead with bursts of uncontainable energy. Laughter rang softly among the hedges. At last, beneath an arch of flowering wisteria, the small family paused. Victor drew Lena near, his voice low. "We are together now," he said. "Nothing will part us." She leaned into him, her eyes shining. "No, nothing." Felix ran back to them, slipping his hand into Victor's with a grin. Together they walked forward beneath the endless blue, the future theirs at last. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of the story? Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give it a like to show your support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotions and life lessons. And before we say goodbye, we'd like to remind you that on the end screen, you'll see a recommendation for another exciting and charming story. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.